to everyone for joining us today. My name is Michael Clark. I'm a past president of the Conference of Consulting Actuaries, managing director at River Mercantile, soon to be Agilis, based in Denver, Colorado. And I'm really excited for my guest today. My guest today is Dominic Lee. Let me give you a little bit about his background, and then I'll have him introduce himself a little bit more. But Dominic is an associate of the Casualty Actuarial Society. He's the senior solutions advisor at SAS and the self-proclaimed Maverick Actuary, which we're going to talk a little bit about. He's a content creator, public speaker, and I pulled this from his LinkedIn profile. He helps quant professionals maximize impact and value using media and storytelling. You can follow him on LinkedIn, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and a whole host of other social media platforms. You can see that in the background for those of you that are watching the video version of this. Dominic, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here, Michael. And thanks for the support on Instagram. You're following me on Instagram too.
Absolutely. No, so part of the reason why I invited Dominic on, I've been following him for a little bit. I think he's got some really great insights as to the profession. That we're going to talk about some of those today, some of his insights. But for Dominic, let's start off for those that don't know you and haven't been following you lately. I'd love for you to take a few minutes to share some of your backstory that's led you to where you're at today.
Great. Well, once more, pleasure to be here, Michael, and tell you a little bit about myself. I'm born and raised in Kingston, Jamaica, so I'm an international guy. And my journey started out more on the athletic side. I would say I was much of an academic at the beginning of my career, early in my life. I was a competitive swimmer. I represented the national team for 8 years, and that was my singular focus, is trying to qualify for the Olympic team. And as I got towards the end of high school, I came to the United States for boarding school, where of course I was on the swim team there as well. And then towards the end of that, when I started thinking more about academics now and what my career path might be, as many other people, I thought of medicine, things like medicine. You know, everyone wants to be a doctor at some point, but turns out I couldn't quite stand the sight of blood, so that wasn't a good choice. And then I tried something again. I tried chemical engineering. Started as a chem engineering undergrad, and turns out that wasn't for me either. And I went back to Jamaica briefly, and I spoke to one of my friends who happened to be studying actuarial science, and she told me about that major. And I'd never heard of it before, like many people who are in college, or maybe not nowadays, but back then. And it was very compelling to me. I thought it was a unique multidisciplinary blend of math, statistics, finance, economics, computer science. I love the idea of the versatility of the profession. And another thing, as an athlete, I was certainly motivated by the competitive nature of the exams, having that competitive mindset as an athlete, and thought that the idea of good compensation, or what I thought back then, was compelling to me. So I did my undergrad. I got into the bachelor's program in actuarial at the University of the West Indies in Jamaica. Worked briefly just for like a year in banking. Financial crisis happened, and then wanted to go to the States again. So got into a master's program at University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Graduated from there, and then it was my first foray into the market. It went into property and casualty insurance. Was always attracted to that market, to the dynamic nature of that particular specialization. And I had another family friend actually who was an actuary who encouraged me to go into that market, said that there was a plug in the market there. So fortunately got an opportunity at a large carrier in the States, spent 9 years there in a leadership development program, was focused on 3 things: business acumen, analytical expertise, and leadership readiness. So had 3 rotations there in a wide range of roles, from personal lines to commercial lines, specialty. So did everything: the personal lines, auto, home, boat, yacht, commercial, multi-line portfolios, specialty, ocean marine, inland marine. So very, very wide range of experience there. Also had opportunity to manage and lead. And then, as many people, I was looking for the next thing in my career. I made a couple of moves to a couple more other insurance companies briefly. And then I realized that that was not conducive to the areas where I added most value. Me as a professional, I'm great on the communication, strategic thinking, and business value side. And I found that the insurance environment wasn't as conducive to that, at least from an actuarial perspective. So when I was in between jobs, did some soul searching. And that's when the TED Style talk, which I think, thank you again for sharing with the audience, the Beyond Insurance happened. Essentially, if I were to summarize it, a SWOT analysis, SWOT, strength, weaknesses, opportunity, threats. Anyone who's been to business school knows that term, but essentially a SWOT analysis looking at the actuarial profession, presenting an aspirational vision for the profession and what I thought were some of the untapped opportunities at the time. Then it turns out, so the talk had some traction. It went on YouTube, and SAS discovered the talk and reached out to me. They were looking for someone to help the sales organization to maximize software revenue for their clients. They're in the risk space, and interviewed for that role. Thought it was a good fit in terms of being a more forward-looking role. So within that role that I'm in now as a senior solutions advisor, I provide business and technical knowledge to customers. I deliver sales presentations, and I help SAS as a software company to advance their knowledge of the insurance market within North America, which is what the territory that I'm focused on. So Maverick Actuary, which we're going to talk about some more. That's my passion project, and the continuation of the thought leadership in the actuarial space that was initiated during the TED Style talk. So that's a little bit about my backstory and how I got to.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that. I didn't realize that TED Style talk that you did actually landed you your next job. That's pretty cool.
Yes.
Well, let's talk about, I mentioned this at the beginning, you just brought it up, you're the self-proclaimed Maverick Actuary. Talk to us for a few minutes about what you're trying to accomplish with this brand that you're developing.
Yeah, great question. And I'm going to answer this question in reverse. I always like to start from the root of the problem or the root of the issue and then kind of work backwards. So Maverick Actuary, it's a direct consequence of my experience during the pandemic. And as we know, the pandemic, the COVID-19 was the most consequential risk management challenge of the past century. Many of us, I'm guessing, weren't around for the Spanish flu. So I think that's the case. And what I noticed, especially since I had the time to observe very keenly, because I was in between jobs at the time, I noticed that the narrative, the analysis, and most importantly, the decisions were primarily driven by career politicians, the medical community, and media personalities. And while you might think on the surface that the pandemic, it was largely a medical event, there are several other risk management issues that warranted expert insights outside of the medical community. So the doctors, of course, were really important. If you think of some of the issues, the risk management issues, diversification within the medical supply chain, triaging of critical healthcare supplies, risk reward considerations of reopening institutions, equitable distribution of federal funds, and other problems that I thought that actuaries, while they might not have traditionally played in those spaces, they were uniquely qualified to solve based on their risk management background. So that's kind of how it started. And at that point, I asked myself the question, why is it that actuaries weren't in the mix in terms of solving these problems? And I identified three critical gaps that within the actuarial profession that I thought explained their limited impact during the pandemic response. The first was name recognition. The second one was having or not having an explainable value proposition. And the third was a lack of a strategic mindset. So with Maverick Actuary, I'm focused on three key angles: media, story, and strategy, to tackle those three specific gaps, to address those three critical gaps. And the overall mission, I think you alluded to this earlier, mission of Maverick Actuary, so maximize the impact and value of quant professionals on a global scale. And what I'm interested in, just in very simple terms, interested in helping actuaries and other quants to be more effective at demonstrating their value so they can have more impact in the work they do. And so both are important, the impact and the value, because as you know, you can have impact without providing value. Some things that happen that are bad have impact, but there's not very valuable. And vice versa, you can have value in something, but not have the impact because people are not aware of it. So that's the gist and the genesis of where Maverick Actuary came from.
Let me ask you, how'd you come up with the name?
That's a great question. I've thought of many different names. I wanted something that sounded revolutionary, and I've always liked the name Maverick or the term Maverick. I thought of some other ones. I'll actually share one or two others I thought of. Well, the only other one I thought of was a renegade actuary. No, I thought that might have been maybe a little bit too disruptive. I wanted to be disruptive, but not too much over the edge. And I'm actually glad I never chose renegade, because when I went to the CAS meeting last year, apparently there's an actuary he's in San Francisco, but he's from the UK. And he's on the CAS side, and he calls himself the renegade actuary. So I was actually glad I chose Maverick, because I went to it was a happy hour and I was wearing the Maverick Actuary t-shirt. So it would have been funny if I showed up wearing the renegade. I start saying renegade actuary and he was a renegade actuary. So,
you might have thought you were there as a fan.
Right. So yeah, it was something that was kind of revolutionary and outside the box.
No, that's great. So where do you see your career going from here, right? You've got a nice job at SAS and what you're doing there. You've got this passion project and the Maverick Actuary that you're developing. Um, where are you looking at long term? Where you take these things and go from here?
Yeah, so to finish up my prior thought, actually, so I just wanted to mention that with Maverick, we're on media is, of course, I mentioned, very integral to what I'm trying to do. So we're on all social platforms, as you can see, developing a website as well, which is almost done. And I'm focused right now on producing transformational content to empower actuaries and quants professionals in those areas that I highlighted. And what I want to do is help to facilitate discussions, to spread ideas, share resources. You see me talking a lot on LinkedIn about actuarial stuff. I'm doing it on Instagram, across platforms. So if I had to summarize it, Maverick, in 3 words, it's empowerment through content. That's a very simple way of thinking of where Maverick is today. Now, in terms of where I see my career as an actuary going in the long term, I'll actually kind of slightly rephrase the question. So personally, for me, I think it's more helpful to answer the question from a broader perspective. I like, when I think of it in today's world, like, I'm an actuary by training and by qualification from an associate perspective, but I would say even in the functional sense today, like, I leverage my actuarial background in the software space, but I'm not even functionally an actuary today. And I remember at the CAS meeting last year, I spoke to one of the actuaries who I have a lot of respect for, and he's an FCAS. And he said to me that he always, something very interesting, he never introduces himself as an actuary. And that was fascinating to me, because we have so much pride in our titles. And I think there's a temptation, for actuaries to hide behind the credentials and the labels, which does distract them from creating meaningful value. So becoming an actuary, in my mind, is more of a foundational milestone along the path to value creation. So professionally speaking, like, when I think of my career in the long term, I think of myself as a value creator more so than an actuary. And where I see my career going is in the direction of the 3 things I mentioned: media, story, and strategy, or some combination of those. Regardless of the precise spot that I land, the domain, the institution, whether it's entrepreneurship, I'm going to be focused on those 3 themes: the media, the story, and the strategy, because I believe that there's some gaps there, definitely in the quant space and perhaps other places as well. So my career is going to be focused on value creation, likely in one of those lanes.
I love what you said there. And I think, we've had, even on this interview series, we've talked with a number of people who have used that actuarial backdrop as a foundation for other going off into different directions, right? And I think that the technical skills and abilities that you learn as an actuary have so much applicability to a lot of different things that somebody could be doing. So I love that that's a direction you're going. Because you brought it up, let's talk a little bit about just your views on the actuarial profession. If you were talking with a kid in college today that was contemplating a career as an actuary, what would you tell them are the pros and cons of the profession?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I'm looking forward to sharing this with my followers, because I think it'll be valuable for them. So I think in terms of the pros, you hit on that tangentially there. The first thing is the opportunity to produce value in many different ways. So when you think of, like, having your long-term market value and prospects, when you have a skill set like the actuarial skill set, it's a powerful combination. It's multidisciplinary, it's analytical, it's deep thinking, and that can open many doors, not just in insurance, but in traditional and non-traditional spaces. So I'd say it gives you a lot of, it's going to increase your market value and give you more options. So the skill set is very broad, deep, and it's very relevant. If you think of risk is evolving, technology is advancing, and in a digitally connected world, there's more data than ever before. So there's going to be opportunities tomorrow that don't exist today. And I think actuaries will be well positioned to capitalize on those. And then the second one, so that's like the first thing, is really the stuff, like the doors it opens, the many options that you have from an employment perspective. The second one, I'm going to use a concept. I don't know, and I know, are you a life actuary, Mike? I'm just trying to think.
Pension actuary, yeah.
So I'm not sure how familiar you are with the concept of the Sharpe ratio. Essentially, it's just a measure of kind of looking at your reward per unit of the risk that you take. And how I think of, like, most people think of the actuarial profession as having, like, high pay, high comp. I don't think of it that way. I think the benefit of being in a profession is it has, like, a good Sharpe ratio. So when you think of how much you get compensated relative to the effort and the stress, when you look at it on a per unit basis, I think it does very well relative to other professions. So I think it's that relative balance there, the reward to risk ratio, is very good for the profession relative to others. So that's the second pro in terms of that balance. Some people might call that work life, but I kind of think of it in, like, comp versus stress. So those are the pros. And then in terms of, you were going to ask about the cons, I think, or did you ask about the cons? I'm not sure.
So let me, we actually had one question come in from someone that's listening live here. Let me interject with this. So do you have any thoughts or encouragement on how a young actuary can balance exposure to different broad areas, such as pension, life, insurance, with really working to become an expert as soon as possible?
Personally, I did it. There's many ways of doing it. The way I did it is I stayed in one domain, the PNC, for a while, for like 9-10 years. I built up my experience, and that helped me to branch out because I had a very deep foundational knowledge there. There's other people who will move around every 1 to 2 years. So I think there's no right answer. I think it just depends. Just like whatever role that you take, try to learn something that you can that's transferable. I always say look for the transferable skills from each job. So for instance, like communication is going to be one. The ability to learn is one. Try to think of the skill sets that you can transfer from one role to the other. So whether you stay in one role for a longer time or you're moving every 18 to 24 months, think of it as like cumulatively building up your skill set so you can be more valuable in the future. That's how I would approach it.
Well, and actually that is a really good lead into the next question that I wanted to get at. What are your thoughts around the future of the profession and what skills actuaries need to develop to be successful?
Yeah, I saw great question. So I think in terms of like, there's many ways you can answer this question. Everyone has a different opinion. From my perspective, I think the biggest transformational shift is going to be how actuaries spend their time. If you think of the technological capabilities today, robotics process automation, and I'm going to drop a slightly technical term, but don't worry about like, this is called in-memory distributed capabilities. And all that means is that with computing capabilities now, machines can scale to any data size. So what I'm getting at is that there's opportunities to take some of that mechanical work. Actuaries used to spend a lot of time on data, or in today's world, spend a ton of time on data wrangling and preparing the analysis. But with the technological capabilities that there are today, I think that in the future, actuaries are going to have an opportunity to spend less time doing that stuff and more time on meaningful things like analysis, evaluation, and decision making. Less time on data processing, tool building, reporting. So I think in terms of the future, I think there's an opportunity to maximize insights, minimize mechanics. So that to me is the most significant shift that's going to happen. Now, you asked about skills. Was that the case? Yeah, I think this is a really important question as well. And I spent some time reflecting on this. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time because it's so important. I'm going to break this down into two pieces. I'm going to talk about like the skills that I think you need that are table stakes, the skills that it takes to be a minimum, what I call like a minimum viable actuary. I'm going to give you 3 of those. And then I'm going to talk about some what I call differentiators, things that can take in my opinion, can take your career into the stratosphere. So let's start off with like the table stakes. The first one that any actuary needs is to have business acumen. You need to have, regardless of where you're working, you need to have a thorough understanding of the space in which you operate, the core of the problems or challenges that your industry, company, or institution addresses, and the markets they serve. Then when you have that, the next thing that you need to have, the second skill, is to be a strategic problem solver. So strategic problem solving. You need to understand which problems need to be solved. A lot of times people ask you to solve a problem, but sometimes that problem is not even important. So first of all, you need to understand like what problems are relevant and need to be solved. And then you talk about the approach to those problems. What is the direction of travel for your analysis? Do you need to go broad before you go deep? What kind of data do you need? These are some of the questions you need to ask yourself. What data do you need? What are the limitations of your data? How do you put assumptions around your data and monitor them? And then very importantly is how do you translate the insights from your data into value? So that's strategic problem solving. I know for a fact the CAS is very focused on that one in their strategic plan. And the third one, intuitively, logically, is communication. Is how do you effectively convey the results of your analysis to influence decision making? And if you're the decision maker, how do you communicate those decisions when you make them? So those are the 3, to me: business acumen, strategic problem solving, and communication, that are table stakes for actuaries. Now, if you want to talk about the differentiators, things I could think that could really launch your career into the stratosphere, there are 3 that I can think of. The first is creativity. When you think of the risk landscape and it emerging, cyber risk and some of these new risks that we haven't seen in the past, like, question is, how do you quantify the cost of risk when you have little to no data? You have to be creative. So that's the first one, creativity. The second one is what I call digital fluency. And that's the ability to select and use appropriate tools and technologies to achieve a particular outcome. And that's particularly relevant in an age of advanced technology where data has volume, variety, and velocity. So that's the second, digital fluency. And the third is, this one is kind of biased. This one is just from my life. I can attest to this one personally, is the media savvy. If you have the ability to use social platforms, I think I tweeted about this yesterday, you might have seen this, you can amplify your value and have a lot of impact. You can scale your value across several platforms, across several audiences. So those three, if you pick those three up, I think those can take you from the table, so the minimum viable actuary into the stratosphere.
So to recap, I love this, by the way, and recapping then: business acumen, strategic problem solving, communication, foundational skills that you'd say beyond the technical, like that's kind of the next layer that as an actuary, you really want to try to develop those skills. And then kind of following on top of that, you layer in creativity, the digital fluency, the media savvy elements in terms of making yourself a successful actuary, right? And I can see that, I mean, depending on, it doesn't even matter what practice area you're practicing in, right? If you're working at a consulting firm, working internally at an insurer, or in some other non-traditional role, like I can see how those skills can help elevate you to where, you can be in a position that similar to where you're at now, where you find yourself maybe not doing as much actuarial work, but are, because you've got the conceptual base, have the opportunity to actually add a lot of value and create a lot of impact along the way.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a great summary. That's exactly it.
I love it.